The three children in Michigan now making national headlines. If you haven't heard, there was horrific abusive conditions that they've lived in for years. This is what the Oakland County Sheriff's deputies are saying. So the sheriff, Michael Bouchard, showing images of the home they were living in alone. The sheriff says the three children, ages 12, 13, and 15, were abandoned by their mother back in 2020. So like 5 years ago, folks. Take a look at these images on your screen. You're looking at some of the deplorable conditions that they were living in. So according to the sheriff, she had food delivered once a week to the home, often just like a loaf of bread, we're being told. And the sheriff says the children's father was incarcerated for a portion of all of that time. But in 2022, we're told he did receive visitation rights. However, the children's mother refused. He also gave an update on the children's condition and efforts to support them now that they are out of the home. Take a listen.
They've already been seen once at McLaren. We intend to have them at a much more detailed, both physical and mental health kind of checkup, if you will. That will happen hopefully this week. When our detectives saw them at their interview at Care House, they were already making amazing progress, having had some tender love, having had some supportive care, having been put in new clothing and some basic hygiene. The one detective said that the little girl was talking quite a bit. So that's super exciting to see that happening. And as it relates to being in the house, the only one of the three that ever came out was the young boy, and he came out twice. Once because he wanted to feel the grass, which by itself is heartbreaking, and a second time to check the mail. So you wouldn't do this to an animal, let alone your child. So, just to hear that he came out to touch the grass is just crushing, soul crushing on so many levels. As it relates to the house, we have obviously released pictures. I'll get my technical expert up. You've already seen some of these pictures. I rolled that little mouse, but it didn't want to cooperate. So inside of the home, as I had mentioned with these pictures, trash was piled, in some places 3 and 4 foot high. Everything was covered with feces and trash. The toilet had become non-functional, and the bathtub was filled with feces. That's the kind of situation these poor kids had been living in for years, not just hours or days, for years. And so when you have the complete lack of hygiene, a complete breakdown of basic living conditions that they were subjected to. And to get a little deeper into that, detectives have narrowed down the initial abandonment they believe to be somewhere in the spring to summer of 2020. Obviously, COVID played a little part in the disconnect potentially with schools and school communications. In 2020, the mother dropped off some trash bags, gloves, and Febreze. And that was about the last thing related to hygiene. 2020, in the height of COVID, okay? Towards the end, the children apparently were getting a loaf of bread dropped off that was intended to last 3 to 4 days. So, obviously on so many levels, the conditions are horrendous and the situation terrible. So what we're trying to do in the meantime, and as it relates specifically to the case, the preliminary report has been turned over to the prosecutor. We're adding some more stuff for them. They're in the process of determination. When I heard about this, I called her on the weekend and let it know it was coming, and she has her staff queued up, and they're in that process. As it relates to the kids, the first thing we wanted to do is obviously get them safe and to get them clean and get them enclosed. And I will say we have one of the most generous communities, I think, in the world. We put on there that we needed clothing, and this is just a tiny sample of what we've received. At the office, of another office of ours, we have bags and bags. So we don't need any more clothing. We greatly appreciate it. The family and the kids greatly appreciate it. And so we're kind of pivoting now to financial support. And we have put up a link, if you will, to the charity Mission Oakland. And 100% of it will go to the kids. Unlike some of the traditional fundraising methodologies you see out there, they take a percentage, 100% of this will go to the kids. What I am asking is, again, our generous viewers and listeners out there and readers, we're looking for a law firm that would set up a trust fund so that we can take 100% of what we receive in donations for these kids and put it in a trust that can be administered, that can take care of maybe their medical bills, mental health visits, and if there's any overage, maybe set some money aside for their future education.
I do think it's important to note that that sheriff is trying to get them some help in the future after all of this has transpired. Of course, 5 years being on their own, looking to provide a better future for those 3 children. Now, again, you just heard the sheriff there hoping to set that trust up for these children. He's also looking to change the law to make sure no other child suffers the same abuse. Take a listen.
All of us are asking, how the heck did this happen? How did we lose 3 kids? How did they fall through the system? The community, the relatives, the schools, how did no one know? And the easiest answer we could come up with, and I put on my old legislative hat, and thank heavens we've got a person on our staff that also had worked in the legislature, and we examined the school code. And there's some gaps that we think in part allowed this to happen. And so what we're going to suggest is there needs to be some changes in state law. Right now, basically, there is no specific duty required that is triggered by certain actions. So what I mean by that is a school district, in this case, received a request for records from another school in Pontiac, but no verification the children ever moved to that school. And so at some point, when they didn't show up, they were just dropped off the enrollment of the school that sent the transcripts. So no one knew that they were nowhere. And so what we're proposing, and we're already communicating to a potential bill sponsor, is some amendments to the school code that will close that communication gap so that before a child is unenrolled, they have to obtain written confirmation that child's someplace else. That doesn't happen now. And that's what happened here, it appears. It's still, again, being investigated because we're going back years and trying to check records. But it looks like based on that request for records, neither of them knew where that child was and presumed, I guess, that the other one had the children. So the other thing, this is the specific language, but it goes into basically filling that gap, closing that hole so that if a child doesn't show up at a school for a period of time, then it triggers a follow-up where they have to communicate with either a truancy officer or law enforcement to begin an examination of what happened to these kids. Where are they? It's unbelievable to think that we've got 3 kids that fell off everybody's map for years. So that goes to the second part, as I said, within 20 days, the sending school that sent those records has to notify the truancy officer if they have not received written confirmation that that child is someplace else safe. So it shortens the window. First trigger is 10 days, second trigger is 20 days. And obviously, this can be worked on, amended, or changed by the legislature. We're just suggesting there's got to be some accountability measures so we don't have kids fall through the cracks in such a horrific way.
So you can see the different ways in which the sheriff is trying to prevent something like this from happening in the future. Of course, we should mention the children's mother is cooperating with police. It's not clear at this point why she left her children. Again, for reference, the sheriff's office is saying she was living in Cadillac, and this happened in Oakland County. The Oakland County prosecutor is looking into the evidence and says that they will be responding accordingly.